Welcome back. So, as we continue reading the Reveal the Gift, Living the Feminine Genius, we are on to chapter 2. So, chapter 2, the title is Self Giving and St Edith Stein. And here we go. As a child, I loved to imagine what heaven looked like. While trying to fall asleep, I would picture a cloud filled landscape with children floating everywhere. On one side were seesaws and swings that somehow grounded themselves in white fluff. On the other was a large kickball field, and everyone playing was having a great time. Basically, my idea of heaven was recess, with the exception of a cloud staircase that divided the two play areas. At the top was an old man with a white beard, God of course, who sat on his throne and happily watched everyone play. From a young age, I knew that my faith taught that God made humans in his image and likeness. I assumed this meant that God looked a lot like me, except he was really old from having been around for eternity. Later in life, I was somewhat disappointed to learn that my theology was more than a bit off. Image and likeness. To say humans are created in God's image and likeness does not mean that we look like God or that God looks like us. Instead, it means that there are certain ways of our being that reflects God's being. For example, humans have an intellect, which means that we can reason. A human has free will, which means we can choose. With the exception of the angels, nothing else in God's creation can do these two things. Another way humanity reflects or images our Creator is in our capacity to give of ourselves to others in a way that reflects the life of the Trinity. The Trinity is a communion of divine persons whose love continuously pours out from one person to another. God the Father pours out his every being of love to God the Son, and in turn, God the Son pours out every being of his love to God the Father. The self-giving love that pours out between them is the Holy Spirit. For St. John Paul II, imaging this self-giving love of the Trinity is fundamental to humanity's discovery of who God has created us to be. Time and again, John Paul II quotes a famous line from the Second Vatican Council document, Gaudium et Spes. Man cannot fully find himself except through a sincere gift of himself. This is probably one of the most famous lines from that council, and perhaps the sentence that John Paul II quoted more than any other. It means that if men and women genuinely want to discover who they are, if they want to discover their purpose and vocation, they can only do so by giving themselves in service to and out of love for the other. To put it in another way, humans can only discover who they are in relation to those around them, and they can only discover those around them by giving themselves to others. Ever reminding people of their call to give of themselves, at the beginning of this letter to women, written for the 1995 United Nations Conference of Women, John Paul II shares his hope for the event. Necessary emphasis should be placed on the genius of women, not only by considering great and famous women of the past or present, but also those ordinary women who reveal the gift of their womanhood by placing themselves at the service of others in their everyday lives. For in giving themselves to others, each day women fulfill their deepest vocation. By reflecting the Trinity and giving of themselves to others, women fulfill their deepest calling, our human gifts. You may have noticed that the first feminine genius gift is not exclusive to women. This is because self-giving is just as much as a call for men as it is for women. In fact, God calls all human beings, men and women, to live each of these gifts explored in this book in complementary ways. These gifts, or values, as Pope Benedict XVI calls them, are not just feminine genius gifts. They are above all human values. When St. John Paul II was Pope, Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Pope Benedict XVI, was the perfect for the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith. During this time, Cardinal Ratzinger wrote a letter for the church entitled On the Collaboration of Men and Women in the Church and in the World. Here, he comments beautifully on a woman's capacity for the other, which is her ability to selflessly live for others. After conveying some of the gifts that are connected to this ability, he clarifies that these values are not restricted to women. And we read as follows. It is appropriate, however, to recall that the feminine values mentioned here are above all human values. It is only because women are more immediately attuned to these values that they are the reminder and the privileged sign of such values. But in the final analysis, every human being, man or woman, is destined to be for the other. Here, Benedict is affirming that feminine gifts or values are for both genders. However, because women are more immediately attuned to these gifts and to living for the other, they are the privileged sign or example of these things. Therefore, it is women's responsibility to bring these person-oriented gifts into the world and model them for the men in their lives, who are also called to cultivate and express these gifts in their own complementary masculine way. When it comes to self-giving, the example of pregnancy is a straightforward way that women uniquely give themselves to others. Through offering up their entire body for the sake of another, women show a literal capacity for the other. Even after birth, this self-giving does not end as a mother continues to give her time, love, emotion, resources to her growing child. However, pregnancy and motherhood are not the only ways women uniquely reveal self-giving in this world. One woman who beautifully demonstrates this is St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, or Edith Stein. Meet St. Edith Stein. In 1891, Edith Stein was born on the holiest day of the Jewish year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Her devout Jewish family lived in what is now Wrocław, Poland, which at the time was part of the German Empire. Edith, the youngest of 11 children, grew up in a home that encouraged education and critical thinking. Despite her admiration for her mother's deep faith, she became a professed atheist by her teens. Although she rejected God, Edith still had a profound desire for truth and goodness, which led her to study for a doctorate in philosophy. Intellectual pursuits were not her only love, however, as she had a profound love for humanity. When World War I broke out, Edith, who was in her 20s, took a year-long break from her studies to tend to the sick as a volunteer wartime Red Cross nurse in an infectious disease hospital. After the war, Edith finished her doctoral dissertation entitled On the Problem of Empathy, and she began teaching at the University of Freiburg in Germany. As you might expect, her stance as a woman in higher education who taught philosophy of all things was not always well received or respected. Despite her brilliant mind, she was unable to advance in her career due to her gender. In the end, though, Edith's place was not in higher education. God had other plans for her. While on summer break in 1921, Edith read St. Teresa of Avila's autobiography, and a conversion to Christ quickly began to take root in her heart. Just months later, on January 1st of 1922, she was baptized into the Catholic Church. With her newfound faith, Edith began teaching at a Dominican school, and her philosophical writings began incorporating the Catholic faith. These changes led her to become a lecturer at the Catholic Institute for Scientific Pedagogy. However, due to her Jewish ethnicity in 1933, she was forced by the Nazi authorities to abandon her teaching position. Around this time, nearly a decade after she became a Catholic, Edith answered a call to become a called Carmelite nun. Shortly after, she took her final vows in 1938, The Nazi reign of terror on anyone of Jewish heritage has stepped into higher gear. Her Carmelite superiors recognized the danger, so they transferred Edith, now Sister Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, and her sister Rose, who was a third-order Carmelite, to a monastery in Echt, Netherlands. Upon arriving, Sister Teresa continued her vocation as a philosophy teacher. However, she knew in her heart that her life would one day end in a concentration camp. As a result of this intuition, she wrote a will and began training herself for a life in captivity by enjoying the cold and allowing herself to feel hunger. Rather than run from her perceived fate, she welcomed it. As time would tell, Sister Teresa's intuition proved correct. In July of 1942, the Bishops' Conference of the Netherlands publicly condemned the racist persecution of the Nazis, and they retaliated by ordering the arrest of all Jewish converts to the Catholic faith. Days later, Sister Teresa and Rose were arrested and began their journey to Auschwitz. A week after their arrival, Sister Teresa and Rose were presumably taken to a small boarded-up farmhouse just outside the camp and died along with many others by poison gas. Revealing the gift of self-giving. For those familiar with Edith Stein's story and writings, it can be easy to see her as an intellectual with whom it would be awkward to share a cup of coffee. But for those who were close to Edith, knew that behind her brilliant mind was a caring and thoughtful woman who cherished everyone, especially her students. Among the thousands of pages written by Edith, one of my favorites is not one of her essays, it's one of her essays on women, or an article on phenomenology. It's a simple letter she wrote to one of her former students, Anneliese Lichtenberg. In 1931, Anneliese wrote to Edith to seek her counsel in a disappointing situation. She had recently been placed on academic probation and feared that she would not be able to pull her grades up before the end of term. No doubt, Edith read her letter with a saddened heart, and she responded warmly by asking her, "Among the books you got as a child, do you have Andersen's fairy tales? If so, read the story of the ugly duckling. I believe your swan destiny. I believe in your swan destiny, I believe in your swan destiny." Few responses from a teacher to a student could be more tender. Edith went on in the letter and further advised Anneliese, don't hold it against others if they haven't discovered this yet, and don't let yourself become bitter. You are not only one to make mistakes day after day, we all do it, but the Lord is patient and full of mercy. In his household of grace, he can use our faults too, if we lay them on the altar for him. This is the often overlooked side of Edith that I so love dearly, the side where she gave herself to the world in so many ways. As a nurse and as a teacher, she cared for and nurtured her soul left in her charge. The souls left in her charge. As a philosopher, she gave of her intellect to the world. And as a martyr, she gave of herself in the ultimate way by offering her life for the church. It would have been easy for Edith to resent the Dutch bishop's choice to speak out against the Nazis. After all, if they had remained silent, she may have survived the Holocaust. But Edith did not resent their choice to condemn Nazism, because the opportunity to give her life for the body of Christ, the church, was something she welcomed. Remarkably, on June 6, 1939, 2 years before her death, she wrote, I joyfully accept in advance the death that God has appointed for me, in perfect submission to his most holy will. May the Lord accept my life and death for the honor and glory of his name, for the needs of his holy church, especially for the preservation, sanctification, and final perfecting of our holy order, and in particular for the Carmels of Cologne and Echt, for the Jewish people, that the Lord may be received by his own and his kingdom come in glory, for the deliverance of Germany and peace throughout the world, and finally for all of my relatives living and dead, and for all whom God has given me. Many, none of them be lost. Edith was not afraid of giving herself, sacrificing herself in atonement for the sins of the world. She wanted to die so that she could mystically give herself for the conversion of the world. For the woman born of the Jewish Feast of Atonement. Her martyrdom was Providential's life bookend that no one could have predicted. How can self-giving get twisted? In my life, I have noticed that sometimes my greatest strengths can become my greatest weaknesses. I can sometimes take the gifts that God has given me and allow them to become twisted, and they end up working against me. This is true of all the gifts of the feminine genius. And I know that I am not the only woman who has experienced this reality. So, after exploring each gift, I will examine a weakness that can twist that gift and then suggest ways to face it. As St Edith Stein's life demonstrates, women have a unique ability to give themselves to others, making it naturally for us to want to be there for others. Being helpful is who we are. Giving to others is what we do. However, in our desire to give, we can sometimes find ourselves in situations where life becomes overwhelming. In those moments, the idea that self-giving leads to happiness can feel like a joke. As my Catholic faith teaches, I know that the only way to find myself is by losing myself. But from a fallen human perspective, many times I have thrown my hands up and said, "It's not working. I'm giving and giving, but I don't feel fulfilled. I just feel exhausted." Of course, I love my husband, but I do not always feel like I have the energy to be the wife that he deserves. Of course, I love my four spectacular children, but they have so many needs. Of course, I love my apostolate, and I know that I am called to it, but wow, does it require a lot of headspace and planning. Each of these things is so important, so I give and give and I give. And sometimes I love it, but sometimes, like a child doing everything she can to delay bedtime, all I want to do is get to my to-do list so I can feel like I accomplished something that day. In those moments, I'm not finding myself as I struggle to give of myself to others patiently. You have been there, right? Surely you know what I'm talking about. The truth is that selfless giving does not come naturally in our broken world. Yet the fact remains that in giving of themselves to others, each day women fulfill their deepest vocation. What can we do about it? The basic solution to the running on empty problem is a buzzword that lives strong in the hashtag world: self-care. While it is a start to fixing the problem, it is a risky one to put forward because it can take two extremes that render it useless. On the one hand, sometimes we feel guilty taking time for ourselves and never actually do it. This is especially true during busy seasons, such as working on a deadline, preparing for holidays, planning a wedding, studying for finals, or welcoming a new baby. In these moments, it seems like the last thing we have is time for ourselves. The problem with this approach is that if we do not take care of ourselves, we risk a burnout. Giving until it hurts is a beautiful thing, yet at the same time, each of us as a real human being with real needs, we need to make sure that those legitimate needs is not in a wimpy way, but actually it is smart. On the other hand, some of us are tempted to use the self-care banner as a way to justify vices. Eating a dessert after every meal because the package says you deserve it. Self-care. Staying up until midnight to binge watch the latest drama series. Self-care. Buying stuff you do not need because it feels good at the moment. Self-care. I know these examples well because I have used them. But there's a fundamental problem when using these types of excuses. Deep down, we all know that binge watching, excessively eating sweets, or therapy shopping are not self-care. They can actually be quite the opposite. Bad habits that ultimately leave us feeling drained and empty. The key to finding, the self-care balance is understanding a straightforward truth. Self-care is not about you. It's about others. It is about taking care of yourself so that you can live your deepest vocation of reflecting the Trinity through self-giving love. 5 categories. There are a staggering number of resources available for self-care, with each program claiming to have found the right formula for finding peace and balance. For this reason, I'm not going to pretend like I have a magic solution here, but I do want to propose 5 simple categories for you to consider when it comes to self-care that support self-giving. Sleep. Number 1 is sleep. When I'm feeling overwhelmed, my spiritual director asks me if I'm getting enough sleep. As I'm yawning. She asks because she knows that sleep is essential for self-giving. The right amount each person needs can vary, but I urge you to find the amount that you need and do what you got to do to guard your sleep. And please skip the late night screen time. You will never regret it. Perhaps the idea of a good night's sleep sounds wimpy compared to the life of an intense giver like St Edith Stein, but she understood the importance of taking care of herself. In the Essays of Women, she suggests that everyone take an afternoon break to shed all cares for a short time before the tabernacle. She adds, whoever also possibly requires bodily rest should take breathing space in her own room. Did you catch that? Edith says if you need a nap, take it. Number 2 is nutrition. Skipping meals to prep for an important meeting or eating toddler scraps or calling it lunch will leave you struggling for the energy that you need. Our bodies need fuel to live selflessly. Regular nutritious meals and plenty of water can go a long way in keeping you sane. Exercise. Number 3, get your body moving. Wherever you hit the gym for an intense cardio class followed by weight training, or you go on a walk after dinner, get your exercise every single day. Number 4, leisure. Leisure time does not mean mindlessly zoning out, which is simply taking a break at best. Authentic leisure, Lord, is participating in activities that make you come alive. Spending time in community, having real conversations, doing a hobby you love with no agenda, getting into nature, reading a favorite book, cooking a good meal, creating with your hands. All of these activities are true leisure. Any day of the week can be appropriate for leisure, but setting aside Sundays for nothing but prayer and leisure is a foolproof way to rejuvenate for the week ahead. Knowing the secret, Edith wrote, Sundays must be a great door through which celestial life can enter into everyday life and strength for the work of the entire week. And number 5 is prayer. This, hands down, is the most essential self-care category. Prayer is vital because without prayer, there is nothing. Perhaps you have some firsthand experience with this, yet still, when things get busy, prayer can easily be the first thing to go. Saint Teresa of Calcutta's missionary of charity once came to her exhausted and overwhelmed. There were too many people to serve and not enough time to serve them. They asked her to rearrange her schedule to allow for more time to work. Do you know what she did? She cut back their daily work hours and added another hour, holy hour of prayer with the Lord. When things get busy, prayer is needed more than ever. For this reason, Edith suggests that prayer not only be left to chance. Placing it at the first item of your daily agenda ensures that your day gets off on the right foot. Edith describes it this way. The duties and cares of the day crowd about us when we awake in the morning, if they have not already dispelled into our night's rest. How can all of this be accommodated in one day? When will I do this? When will I do that? How shall I start on this? How shall I start on that? Thus agitated, we would like to run around and rush forth. We must take the reins in hand and say, take it easy. Not any of this may touch me now. My first morning hour belongs to the Lord. I will tackle the day's work, which he charges me with, and he will give me the power to accomplish it. I know committing to daily prayer can be impossible at times, but daily prayer is actually not complicated. I have found that many people think that they need a grand plan with multiple steps to obtain holiness, which makes them feel overwhelmed. But a grand plan is not what we need. The most important thing for prayer is just to show up no matter what. When you are tired, show up. When you do not have time, show up. When you feel like prayer is dry, show up. Show up saying, here I am, Lord, and take a deep breath. Read the Bible, utilize meditation books, pray the rosary, whatever aids you in your daily conversion with God. Do not get lost in the weeds when it comes to prayer. Simply schedule time and show up. Self-giving challenge. For our first challenge, I invite you to develop a plan for taking care of your basic needs so that you do not end up running on empty. Using the 5 simple categories of sleep, nutrition, exercise, leisure, and prayer, come up with a reasonable and doable plan to make them each a priority. Keep in mind that no matter how basic your plan is, you will not always execute it with 100% accuracy. Do not let that discourage you. The point of your plan is not to give you a rigid checklist that leaves you feeling guilty when you fail keeping it perfectly. The point is to provide you with something to aim for. Even if you do not hit all of it all the time, you will hit some of it most of the time, and that is better than nothing. So get out a pen and paper and start planning how you will take care of you so that you can take care of others. Thank you for tuning in for chapter 2, and stay tuned for the discussion questions. Have a beautiful and blessed day.